Some people live what feels like two completely different lives in one lifetime. Well, that was definitely the case for John Donne. In his first life, he was a passionate, rebellious poet. In his second, a pious, celebrated preacher. So, how does one man become both? That's the story we're diving into today, a story of huge contradictions and a really radical transformation. And that's really the central question here, isn't it? How did the guy who wrote some of the most sensual, witty, and honestly steamy love poems in the English language become one of the most respected religious figures of his time? It sounds like a classic sinner to saint story, but as we're about to see, the path he took was anything but straight. I mean, just look at this. On one side, you've got Jack Donne, handsome, wearing a sword, full of what his biographer called the giddy gaieties of that age. Then on the other, you have the somber dean of St. Paul's Cathedral, whose powerful sermons on life and death and God had all of London just hanging on his every word. It's wild. The same person, living two completely different lives. All right, so let's start at the beginning, with a man they called Jack Donne. Before he was preaching from a pulpit, he was writing poetry. Before the sermons, there were literally sword fights. This is the first chapter: the poet, the lover, the adventurer. Young Donne was a true Renaissance man, a rising star in a world that was already full of them. He was super ambitious, incredibly smart, and his poetry, which was passed around by hand, was the talk of the town in London's literary scene. He was all about worldly experiences. He had this razor-sharp mind and just this deep passion he poured into everything. His future looked totally limitless. But that same fire that fueled his poetry, well, it also led him to make a choice that would completely derail his entire life and career. He fell in love. And wow, did he pay a heavy price for it. Okay, so here's what happened. It all went sideways because of a secret marriage. He fell for a woman named Anne Moore. She was only 17 and happened to be the niece of his very powerful employer. They got married without her father's permission. Well, when her dad, Sir George Moore, found out, he was absolutely furious. He used all his influence to get Don thrown in jail. And not just him, but the friends who witnessed the wedding, too. By the time Don got out, his career was in ruins. In one single, passionate move, he had lost everything. His first biographer put it pretty bluntly: he lost a good one, meaning his job, his prospects, his whole place in society. The marriage he fought so hard for, the one he saw as an act of love and honor, became, in the cold, hard reality of the world, sadly chargeable to him. It almost bankrupted him and basically made him a social outcast. This catastrophic decision plunged Donne and his new family into a really long period of hardship. These were his wilderness years, a time of struggle, of doubt, and, as it turns out, of profound and strange visions. For over a decade, John Donne, one of the most brilliant minds of his generation, was just adrift. He had no real job, and he had to rely on the charity of friends to support his wife and their rapidly growing family. The source material paints this grim picture of a guy plagued by sad thoughts and some apparent apprehensions of want. In other words, the constant fear of poverty was now his reality. But it was during these years of struggle that something really strange and profound happened. He was on a trip to Paris, separated from his pregnant wife, Anne, when he had a vision that just defied explanation. Apparently, before he left, Anne had told him she had this awful sense of dread, that her divining soul boded her some ill. And tragically, her fears came true. Over in Paris, a friend found Donne in a total state of shock, an ecstasy, he called it. Donne claimed he'd just seen an apparition of his wife walk through the room holding a dead infant. And here's the unbelievable part. A message came from London later confirming that at that very hour, Anne had given birth to a stillborn child. Their connection, what his biographer called a sympathy of souls, was so strong it transcended distance. There's just no other explanation. In fact, it was the pain of being separated from her for that very trip that inspired one of his most enduring poems, a valediction forbidding to mourn. It was kind of a farewell gift to his wife, his attempt to put into words the deep connection they shared, a connection that was just tested in the most extraordinary way.
In the poem, he basically argues that their love is so pure, it's beyond just physical. He says their two souls are really one, so when he has to leave, it's not a break, it's an expansion. And he uses this amazing image of gold being hammered so thin that it becomes a delicate, airy leaf. It covers more ground, but it never actually breaks. It's a beautiful tribute to their love, but you can also see it's a mind that's starting to grapple with the spiritual, a hint of the divine love that would later consume him. So after years of trying and failing to find a normal, secular job, a way out finally appeared from the most powerful man in the kingdom, King James I. But the path he offered was not the one Donne expected at all. Now, King James was a scholar himself, and he was seriously impressed by Donne's theological writings. He saw that this guy had a brilliant and sharp mind. But the king didn't see a courtier or a diplomat. Nope, he saw a powerful voice for the church. So every time Donne applied for some worldly job, the king would kind of block it, gently but firmly steering him toward a totally different destiny. Donne, however, resisted. He was haunted by his wild past, his youthful irregularities, and he felt completely unworthy of such a holy job. He even told the king his doubts, but James was unshakable. He believed that Donne's vast learning and powerful intellect, which had been forged in the real world, were exactly what God's service required. He figured a sinner would have a much deeper understanding of grace. So after a long, agonizing internal struggle, a lot like the famous conversion of St. Augustine, Donne finally gave in. He accepted what he now saw as his inescapable destiny. In 1615, at 42 years old, the poet John Donne became a priest. The transformation was official. And this decision kicked off the final and most famous chapter of his life, his time as the celebrated Dr. Donne, the preacher. But his new path began with an absolutely devastating blow. Just 2 years after his ordination, his beloved wife Anne, the woman he had sacrificed everything for, died. He was left a widower and the sole caretaker of their 7 surviving children. The man who had once written so beautifully about love was now just consumed by grief. With his greatest earthly love gone, Donne channeled all of his immense passion, his formidable intellect, and his profound grief right into his new calling. His sermons, delivered from the pulpit of St. Paul's Cathedral, became legendary. They were complex, emotional, brilliant, and the congregation could feel the weight of his personal experience in every word. He rose quickly, becoming the Dean of St. Paul's, one of the most prestigious religious posts in all of England. This poem, written about him after he died, just captures the transformation perfectly. It says, "He didn't kill the passionate poet inside him. He didn't get rid of his wit. He transplanted them." The same powerful tools he had once used to explore the complexities of human love were now aimed at the mysteries of the divine. And then, in this beautiful, full-circle moment, his newfound success brought a long-awaited reconciliation. Years after their bitter feud, Sir George Moore, the man who had once had him jailed, came to him. He was so impressed that his son-in-law was now the Dean of St. Paul's that he finally offered to pay his daughter's dowry. But Donne, no longer that desperate young man, graciously tore up the bond, saying Sir George's love and support were payment enough. Incredible. You know, from the vantage point of his later years, Donne looked back and didn't see a series of failures. He saw a divine pattern. He came to believe that it was God's hand that had, and I'm quoting him, "prevented me from all temporal employment." All those years of struggle, all those blocked ambitions, in his mind, that was just God's way of making sure he found his true purpose in the ministry. Which leaves us with a final question. Was the pious Dr. Donne a completely new man, or was he the same passionate, brilliant, intense soul as the young Jack Donne, who had simply found a new, and maybe even greater, stage for his lifelong obsessions with love, death, and eternity? It really makes you wonder about the nature of reinvention in all our lives. Thanks for watching.